Well, welcome everybody. It's 6:30 now and we'll start. Welcome to the Royal College of Surgeons of England SAS Surgeons as Examiners webinar. So my name is Fiona Mint and I am the Senior Vice President of the College, and I have with me on the panel today as well Vanita Shaker, who is our SAS Forum Chair, and Alex Landau, who is our Director of Examinations at the College. So you're very welcome to the webinar today, and I'm going to give you a brief summary as to what to expect over the next half an hour in terms of what we're going to say, and then hopefully give some time for everybody to ask us some questions. So next slide, please. Firstly, we're going to have a bit of a background on SAS Surgeons and the examining process so far. Why the SAS surgeons find examining very important, and Vanita's going to give us a good little talk about that. Then Alex is going to tell us a bit about the recent intercollegiate developments that have brought us to this point here and describe the person specification and the structured references that are required in order to apply. I'll then tell you a little bit about why I think, or why we all think it's important, that this process is important to us at the Royal College of Surgeons of England, and some signposts as to how we apply. So I'm going to hand over to Vanita now, who's going to give us some background about SAS Surgeons and examining. So thank you, Vanita.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and thank you for the introductions. So just kind of giving a background to SAS Surgeons and examining, I joined SAS Forum almost 6 years ago. And I remember any webinar we did, any meeting we held outside college, one question that popped up was, when are we going to be examiners? What are we doing for SAS surgeons to be recognized as examiners? So this was a desire expressed by SAS surgeons who wanted to be eligible and who wanted to act as MRCS examiners for many, many years. I think one of the persons who I should give credit to is one of our forum members, Mrs. Beryl D'Souza, who was very consistent with keeping on making an effort for us to keep trying. So we have been in touch with ICBSE for a long time. The criteria has been considered in the past, most recently in 2018, and the largest obstacle we found was the eligibility criteria, which was being a substantive consultant post or equivalent for basic sciences examiners. At that point, we thought that there needs to be an effort to change this to person specifications, and it should be based on knowledge, skills, and experience, which should be expected of an examiner. So this was a collaborative effort between the SAS Forum and ICBSE, where we worked on writing person specifications, and ICBSE board was very kind and established an intercollegiate short life working group in 2022 to look at the examiner eligibility criteria. Reason being intercollegiate is the eligibility criteria would be the same. If one college gives eligibility, I think it will be accepted by all. So it was an intercollegiate work, and the inspiration and desire also came from the Kennedy report, the SAS strategy, and as part of SAS strategy, DI work, and also equal opportunities for SAS workforce. Next slide, please. Another reason why we thought SAS should be included in examining is the GMC survey of 2020, which implied the potential of SAS doctors and dentists in delivery of education and training is not being optimized. It showed 74.2% of SAS doctors trained other staff, that included senior trainees. Only 1.5% were college and faculty examiners, and only 1.4% were education leads. However, only 0.7% were module leads or training program directors, and this was one of the reasons we thought that we have to do something and bring out the reason for the change of eligibility criteria. Next slide, please. In addition to having the GMC survey, we also realized that when the new contracts came, the specialty doctor contract 2021, if we look at the contract with fine tooth and comb, it mandates that SAS doctors demonstrate their contribution to wider education, research, and leadership, and that influences on the pay progression, not just their status as examiner. And if you are going to be a specialist grade, it requires evidence of involvement in education and training to enter and progress through the grade. And if we look at the Academy of Medical Royal College's recent paper, which was published in 2022, it kind of stated that SAS as educators should be a norm rather than the exception. And this paper has been endorsed by all royal colleges. That means there is an expectation from all colleges for all medical workforce, not just the surgeons, that SAS should be recognized as examiners, as trainers, and as educators. So now I'm going to hand over to Alex, who is going to talk to us about the process, what has been done in the background, and how the future lies for the SAS to be recognized as examiners. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Vinita. So as Vinita's already said, there was an intercollegiate short life working group established in 2022 to revisit the MRCS examiner eligibility criteria, and more importantly, how these could be demonstrated in practice through the application process. And this seems like a relatively straightforward process, but it was quite an involved discussion because it sought to replace the primary criterion of holding a substantive consultant post that was previously in place, which in fact serves as a proxy for lots and lots of things that go into that as a relatively straightforward way of identifying an individual's knowledge, skills, and experience in a surgical education and training capacity. And this revised approach reflected practice increasingly seen in comparable exams in other specialties under the GMC's regulation. And the Internal Quality Assurance Committee chair in ICBSE at the time was a senior examiner for the Royal College of Anaesthetists membership exam. So we worked closely with existing criteria and pro forma that were in existence for that examination to look how we could structure our own approach as a guide. Next slide, please. So the first output of the Short Life Working Group was to look at this revised person specification, and this covered 4 principal areas. So professional requirements, professional and occupational training, experience, knowledge and skills, and personal attributes. Next slide, please. And by far the most challenging of these in terms of qualifying criteria was that related to clinical experience, knowledge and skills required. And I've given on the screen an excerpt of the person's specification relating to this specific area. And probably within this, the first 3 criteria are the ones that were the source of the greatest discussion and consideration by the Short Life Working Group. So these relate to the criterion of at least 8 years experience post-attainment of either the MRCS or the MRCS ENT. At least 8 years combined surgical experience in either post-core surgical training or a substantive senior SAS grade or NCHD surgical post, and demonstrable experience of surgical practice to include outpatient work, inpatient work, including leading ward rounds, independent operating, and emergency on-call work. Next slide, please. So once that revised person specification was agreed, the second stage of the work of the Short Life Working Group was to agree how these criteria could be demonstrated through the application process. And this is now achieved by a more structured approach to identifying the clinical experience of applicants than was previously in place, where we had that mainly single criterion of holding a substantive consultant post. And this asks for information around applicants' outpatient work, inpatient work, including leading ward rounds, independent operating, and emergency on-call work, which feature in the person specification as I covered in the previous slide. Next slide, please. And in terms of the next steps following the conclusion of the Short Life Working Group's remit, the revised person specification and structured reference form was formally approved by the ICBSE committee in July 2023. And later that month, it was then ratified by the 4 college presidents at the Joint Surgical Colleges meeting. I'm very delighted to say that the window is now live for those wishing to apply, and indeed applications have already been received and reviewed at this moment in time. So I'm going to hand back to Fiona now.
Thank you very much for that, Alex. Could I have the next slide, please? So this, of course, is a very important outcome for us at the Royal College of Surgeons of England, because, as you know, when we commissioned the Kennedy report in 2021, it was because we were aware that there were issues with equality, diversity and inclusion across surgery and within the college. Baroness Kennedy asked us to look at 16 points, recommendations. In fact, we created a 17th on top of that. And amongst those, of course, was developing the SAS Forum and sorting out or looking at and trying to shorten the gap of differential attainment in examinations. So this will be part and parcel of that, and we really welcome this change that has been allowed by the 4 colleges, and in this particular college we welcome it with open arms. So in terms of Kennedy and in terms of differential attainment, this is one of the key aims that we have. Differential attainment, as we all know, in examinations is multifactorial, but we feel that actually having a diverse group of examiners will hopefully edge towards lower and lower differential attainment. Can I have the next slide, please? So if you're considering joining the Court of Examiners, that's our panel of examiners at the Royal College of Surgeons of England, there is a web page which is there on the screen in front of you, and you can also access that via our Royal College web page. This applies whether you're applying to become an examiner for the MRCS or MRCS ENT. This is not yet the case for the FRCS. The FRCS, it's a bit different and is overseen by a different intercollegiate body. So this has been worked through with ICBSE, which is the intercollegiate body looking after the MRCS exam. It is the JCIE, a different body that looks after the FRCS exam, but we're one step closer with the MRCS. If you're not sure about your eligibility, then there's an email address at the bottom of this slide, and our team will be very happy to try and answer questions for you and to guide you in terms of whether you may or may not be eligible to apply. And of course, if you feel you are, then please feel free to apply. We do want to broaden our panel of examiners. Next slide, please. So please think about applying. This is a picture of a very, very small proportion of our almost 400 examiners on our Court of Examiners. We'd like you to be in our next picture underneath Hunter's statue, so please apply. We look forward to receiving your application. Next slide, please. So if you have any questions now, we will start fielding them. So I am going to start looking at some of the questions as they appear on the screen. I hope everyone has been able to see the slide. So there's a question here. Is the MRCS exam mandatory to be an examiner? Alex, perhaps you'd like to answer that question.
Yes, it is. For those wishing to be a clinical examiner rather than a basic sciences examiner examining specifically in either the anatomy, pathology or physiology basic sciences stations, the MRCS is a requirement.
I think also, though, as Alex quite rightly points out, I think with if you are a basic scientist who happens to be an SAS doctor and you fulfil the criteria to be a basic science examiner, it is also possible for you to apply to be through that route as well, but you will only examine in basic science and not in clinical practice. Next question. Can specialists holding European titles of specialisation be members of the Royal College of Surgeons, and if not, why? Well, I will answer that question. The answer is yes, you can. If you hold European qualifications and you are practicing at the level of a consultant surgeon, you can apply to become a fellow of our college ad eundem. And there's an application for that on our website as well. Your application will be looked at by the ad eundem committee, and if you're deemed to be of equivalent qualification or standard or level, then you'll be invited to become a member ad eundum. You don't have to sit an examination. You do have to have equivalence in terms of everything else, though. So that is possible. I hope that answers that question. Okay, let me see if there are any other questions. It says here, another question for Alex here. Can you be an MRCS examiner without the MRCS, but if you've done the FRCS?
So if you hold the FRCS as taken through JCIE, but you don't have the MRCS, then you would be able to, you would be eligible to be an MRCS examiner. There was quite a lot of discussion amongst the members of the Short Life Working Group as to whether it should be a requirement to have the FRCS or the MRCS as a qualification as part of the eligibility considerations, and it was identified that the MRCS would suffice specifically because it was an intercollegiate group, and representatives from the Irish College said that in the Irish context, there were quite a lot of quite senior people that only had the MRCS but not the FRCS, and that would preclude them from examining. So either the MRCS or the FRCS would be sufficient.
And at the moment, of course, we now have a situation where going forwards, you have to have the MRCS in order to sit the FRCS.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. I'm going to read this one out because it's a long one. It says, from my understanding of the recommendations from the SAS strategy report, one of the biggest hurdles for SAS surgeons in becoming involved in education is the workplace culture. Could you tell us what the college is doing to help change that culture and better support SAS surgeons more generally? Vanita, as our chair of the SAS Forum, perhaps you'd like to answer that question for us.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So if you have been aware of the SAS Forum work, you will realize that we have a huge DI website on which much of our research work has been published. And it is quite a bit of an evidence to show that we have been quite involved with all workplace leaders, the colleagues, and the wider stakeholders. And there is much awareness of SAS and its capabilities, its expertise. GMC is focusing much more on SAS doctors because if you're not aware, we are 33% of the workforce, but by 2030, we are expected to be 60% of the medical workforce. So we are a huge number, and it is only it is only right to use this workforce in future training. If you come to our events organized by the college, for example, Future Surgery, you will realize that there is a mingling of all different members of the group, whether it's a trainee or SAS surgeon or a consultant or the support staff. We have panels, we work together outside the conferences. We have lots of educational courses where we are working together. College organizes lots of support events where we are being trained to work together. So I can say that college is doing its best to influence the workplace. As phase 3 of our SAS strategy, we will be doing the road shows, we will be joining presidential visits, speaking to the workforce leaders and SAS members and fellows, whether or not they belong to the English college. We'll be speaking to them all, and we will be working in the future. So yes, college is doing a lot of work, but I think we would want you to come and join the group. College is giving so many opportunities, and I think this is our opportunity as SAS surgeons to utilize this opportunity and bring our visibility in the college life, because that will make our place much more stronger for the future.
Thank you very much, Vanita. And as a college, we're very grateful to you for spearheading a lot of this activity. So thank you. There's another question. In fact, there's a couple of questions that probably all tie in amongst each other, which I'm going to ask Alex to answer. And it's really to do with how long you've had to have various qualifications to become an examiner. So one question here is, if you have the MRCS and the CHM in surgery and the FRCS and Fellowship of European Board in Surgery, do you still need to be 8 years from having sat the MRCS in order to become an examiner? And there's a similar question that says, how many years after FRCS can you be eligible to be an examiner? Perhaps answer both of those together.
So in terms of the first, it is 8 years after attainment of the MRCS as a minimum to be eligible. For those who hold FRCS but not MRCS, I'm not absolutely certain how that would be reviewed. For people in that situation, I would recommend contacting the college in the first instance at the email address that was included in the slide deck earlier, and further advice can be given.
Thank you. And in fact, there's another similar question, which is, do you need a certain amount of years post MRCS or a certain amount of years as an SAS surgeon to be eligible?
So it's 8 years post MRCS, and it's 8 years surgical experience either in post core surgical training or a substantive senior SAS grade post.
Can I ask a question on that, which might help expand this? Does it have to be 8 years continuous service in a UK post?
As opposed to
8 years intermittent service or 8 years service elsewhere, but having sat the exams here.
Mm-hmm. So I don't imagine it would need to be continuous service, because we would want to make sure this is accessible to as many people as possible who have the requisite knowledge, skills, and experience. And that might not be compatible with individuals' personal circumstances. I guess this is all an unintended or maybe an intended consequence of a slightly more complicated person specification approach versus holding a substantive consultant post. I think there are going to be a lot of these cases in which people's individual circumstances are not necessarily perfectly clear against the criteria, and in all of those cases, I, as a director of exams, or others within my team, would be very happy to provide further advice, guidance, support, etc., to help people on their journey.
Thank you. I don't think there are any other questions.
While we're waiting
there is a question
for
that perhaps
questions, I might
go ahead, Vanita.
So just wanted to highlight that it is not just about MRCS or FRCS. There are so many other things surgeons can do to be recognized as trainers. If you look at the GMC criteria of, how to be a trainer, you could be trainer at undergraduate level or postgraduate level within the universities and local deaneries. And that's important too. It all counts towards knowledge and experience. So please do look at that and make sure that you're recognized trainer at workplace, because that's really strong. It's a huge value when it comes to knowledge and experience of examining.
I think to add to that, the college does have some courses which would welcome SAS faculty. For instance, student surgical skills course, that sort of thing. So please do look at our website and look at our list of potential faculty that you could join. Are there any more questions?
There is one more. Is the Iraqi?
Oh yes, there is another one here. Oh yeah, there's another. Okay, we've got a few questions appearing now. There's one question which I'm not sure is perhaps the remit of this particular webinar, which is the Iraqi medical certificate recognised in the United Kingdom? I'm not quite sure what that relates to, and if that relates to sort of primary medical qualification, then I think the best place to ask is the GMC. I think if that's what that question means. There's somebody else saying that they passed their MRCS 5 years ago. Congratulations. Can they apply? Well, I think it seems to me from what Alex says that the criteria is 8 years. So I think you may have to wait 3 years, but you can prepare. As Vanita says, if you can build up your educational portfolio, you'll have more things to put on your application form. So perhaps now is the next 3 years is the time to prepare for that. There's another question here, who's a gentleman I think it might be a gentleman, who says, I have 8 years post MRCS ENT and the European Fellowship in ANT and now a substantive specialist in ANT. Can I apply as an examiner? I think the answer is yes, is it not, Alex?
Yeah,
because he's 8 years post MRCS ENT. So there we go. We've got one potential applicant already. So that's brilliant. And there's another interesting question here. Why is it 8 years post MRCS when members of RCOG can become examiners just after 3 years? I'm going to ask Alex that in a minute, but I'm just going to make a comment on that to say that we have 2 exams in surgery. One is the MRCS and one is the FRCS, and they are spaced apart, and they examine different levels, whereas I think there is really only one exam for RCOG college, isn't there, for RCOG? So I wonder whether that's why it's slightly different for them, and it's probably slightly more of an exit exam than ours is. But Alex, would you like to expand on that?
I think the 8 years was a rough approximation of the time between passing MRCS and getting to a consultant or even a substantive consultant post through higher surgical training, and that was felt to to act, I guess, as a proxy for equivalent experience and knowledge and skills as we had at the moment for the examination, with the requirement to have substantive consultants as examiners, but enabling access to the role of examiner to people who hadn't necessarily chosen that route.
Yes. And Alex, a question that I'm going to put that I sort of know the answer to, but I'd like you to answer for the benefit of the audience. What about people who've not quite reached that level of time or experience and writing exam questions rather than being a physical examiner on the OSCEs?
So I think one of the most exciting developments that ICBSE has introduced over the last couple of years is an expansion of involvement in the question writing process to lots of people within the surgical community. So we have trainees who have relatively recently passed the MRCS themselves, who contribute to the question writing process for both the Part A, so single best answers, and also the Part B OSCE stations. So those people who are more senior than some of those involved in the question writing process currently, but are not yet eligible to become examiners themselves, would absolutely be welcome to help us increase our question banks.
Thank you for that, Alex. And I think for those that person who asked the question before, who has 3 years to go before becoming a fully fledged examiner, that will be the pathway in a way, to start writing questions and becoming involved that way. There's another question here, which I might direct to Vanita, or possibly Alex. Do you have to be on the SAS contract to prove your senior position, because there are significant numbers of locally employed doctors who might wish to apply? Who would like to take that question?
I can take that. So LEDs, LEDs, locally employed surgeons can apply to be examiners as well. I think we are looking at more knowledge, skills, and experience. So titles do not matter anymore. So if you can prove you have MRCS, if you can prove you have 8 years of experience working as locally employed doctor, because I think 8 years, one of the reasons we chose was you are quite senior at your workplace. You are working almost independently, having been close to threshold 2. And at that point, you had developed enough to do the examining, and that is the time a trainee takes from passing MRCS to doing their exit exams. So there are multiple reasons why we chose 8 years. So if you have 8 years work experience working as locally employed doctors and have your MRCS, yes, you can apply.
I think no one's going to stop anyone applying. I suppose at the end of the day, just bringing us down to earth just a little bit, every application is reviewed individually, and there's the potential for anybody to be, with the right CV and right application form, to be accepted. And there's also the potential for the occasional person to be rejected, and that even applies, believe it or not, to people who are consultants. So you do have to have the right sort of portfolio in order to apply to become an examiner, because of course you want to do your job well and have the right background, and that's why. So it isn't just a case of you've got the MRCS 8 years ago, you can become an examiner. You do have to have something else on your CV that demonstrates that you're an interest in education, and that you've kept it up, etc. And it doesn't have to be qualifications, it can be what you do at work, etc. And we look at that on everyone's application, whether you're an SAS doctor, an LED, or a consultant. A few more questions coming now. It says, what are the other certificates required for an examiner, such as training the trainers, and is that mandatory? It's not mandatory. I suppose that just reiterates a little bit of what I just said, in that you just have to demonstrate a portfolio that is an educator's portfolio in order to be successful in becoming an examiner, because it is, in many respects, it is the assessment side of education, isn't it? And I think it would be unlikely, if you've done nothing in education, that you be looked upon favourably in terms of becoming an examiner in your first application. If you go off and then do something in terms of education, no one's specifying what it is, but something that demonstrates your interest in education, then someone is more likely to look favourably on your application to become an examiner. Okay, next question. If someone qualified in a specialty outside the UK, practiced as a consultant outside the UK, but came to the UK recently as an SAS doctor and cleared both the MRCS and FRCS in less than 8 years, would they still have to wait 8 years, Alex?
So the answer to that would be yes, I'm afraid. And partly it's because we want to see, or ICBSE wants to see, demonstrable understanding of the UK surgical training context. And that's really important. This exam plays a really important part in the UK surgical training program. And lots of the criteria on the person specification form relate to a commitment to, but also an understanding of that surgical training context. And a length of time practicing within that was felt by ICBSE to be an important criterion in demonstrating that in practice.
Thank you, Alex. And there's another question that's on similar lines. What if you're 8 years post MRCS, but 4 years have been spent in the UK and 4 years spent abroad working, but you're still 8 years post MRCS?
So I would say that is a good example of something that would be reviewed more closely at application stage. I would certainly encourage that individual to submit an application based on being 8 years post MRCS, and then it would be subject to further review. But one thing I would say about this review process, we're presenting this as the English College. Applications will come to us to be part of our English College Court of Examiners. But our applications and any other applications from other colleges also get reviewed by ICBSE. So whilst there's a little less certainty around answers to these questions, because the criteria is more complex and nuanced now, the decision-making process will necessarily be consistent between all applicants, between all colleges, because it goes through that single point as the intercollegiate unit of ICBSE.
And actually, along those lines, the questions are coming actually sort of in sequence. If an application is rejected, is there any feedback from the panel on what the candidate needs to improve on for the future, Alex?
Yes, I think we're still, in truth, we're early on in this process. So to my knowledge, I don't know of any unsuccessful applicants who've requested feedback or required feedback or not been provided with feedback. But absolutely, I think it's a reasonable expectation that if an application is rejected, there's some further information provided to the individual. And Fiona mentioned that on some occasion, consultant applicants get rejected. And I do know on those occasions, there has been feedback provided to the individual for the reasons.
Thank you very much. Someone else has said, what courses or activities do you recommend to get before applying, as I've got a few years before applying? I think we've kind of covered that a little bit already, but Vanita, perhaps if you'd like to add to that, what things do you suggest that people do before applying if they haven't quite got the 8 years under their belts yet?
So I would suggest that look at the curriculum trainees follow. You might find there are certain courses which are advised for trainees to do. The trainees, it's mandatory for trainees to do training the trainers, otherwise they don't get through the exit exam. So I think it's only fair that we do training the trainer as well. Doing the training, the trainers course also give you recognition as recognized trainer at workplace via deaneries, and GMC recognizes that as well. So I think there is a huge number of courses you can do to be recognized as trainers, and every little helps towards your status as examiner for MRCS. Thank you.
I think that's very good advice, Vanita. Thank you. I think in addition to going on courses that other people set up, You could teach in your local institution. If you set up teaching programs, have feedback for it, get involved in local activities that are involved in education, have some feedback from your supervisors or the people who are running the teaching programs in your locality, then all those things add up. I think anything that's educationally orientated is helpful. Okay, another question that I think I might ask Alex. Some SAS surgeons are not on the on-call rota, but still function at a fairly senior level, delivering independent elective care. Would they be eligible? And I think this question's come up specifically because you've given the broad brush of clinical activity as the criteria for application.
So again, I think that is something that would be reviewed at the application process or through the application process. As with the answers to lots of these questions, if people are fulfilling lots of criteria, but there are one or two that they feel are not being demonstrated through their experience to date, I would suggest contacting us at the address that was identified earlier on to identify this further. And I'd be very happy to have informal conversations with some people involved in the review process to give a bit more clarity.
Thank you, Alex. And then another question, which has come up a few times, both directly and indirectly. We've said that it's 8 years post MRCS. Is there a strict number of years post FRCS if you don't hold the MRCS?
So I think the simple answer to that is no. I suspect that, again, that is something that is going to be refined as the process itself becomes more mature. I think there was a lot of time spent by the Short Life Working Group debating whether it should be MRCS or FRCS that is the mandatory criterion. As I said, it was identified as being MRCS, so it could be sufficiently inclusive for all four surgical colleges, clinical contexts. It might well be that that will have to come out during the application process rather than providing 100% clarity at this stage, I'm afraid.
I suppose if you're 8 years post core training level and you have the FRCS, you probably have a reasonable chance of being considered. I'm just saying that from my personal interpretation of the guidelines. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Fiona, while we're waiting for more questions, I can just touch on international certificates and education. I think where it comes from is the recent change of legislation by the GNC, where they're recognizing international certificates or international educations. Now, there are going to be lots of teething problems because GNC has not yet given the full list of what educational activities they will recognize for candidates to be registered or either on the general medical register or as a specialist. But from examiner point of view, I think our level of understanding is that we need MRCS and or FRCS. Because that is the one kind of exam that identifies the candidate's knowledge, skill, and experience, what we see in an examiner, and it has to be equivalent to the our British English education program compared to European or other international training programs, because each country has its own training program. And MRCS and FRCS gives a single standard level of education and experience to be an examiner, and hence I think single marker for eligibility is MRCS and or FRCS.
And I think, thank you, Vanita. And I think to add to that, it must be remembered that the reason why we have the MRCS and the FRCS examinations in the British Isles are that they are blueprinted to our training curricula. So the MRCS is blueprinted to our core training curriculum, and the FRCS is blueprinted to our higher training curricula, depending on which specialty you're in. And that is, I think that is probably why ICBIC have stipulated that you need to have a certain amount of experience in the UK, because then you understand the curriculum against which you're examining. So it's not just a standard of knowledge, it is actually blueprinted to the curriculum, and that's quite important.
And I think, just to add to that, Fiona, I think that's a really important point in the context of is it 8 years post MRCS. and how many post FRCS. I think if you hold the FRCS, but you've demonstrated that you have 8 years experience in clinical practice in a UK context, that's something that could be looked at further during the application process, I think, even if you don't specifically have 8 years post FRCS.
Indeed. I think it would be real tough if you had to be 8 years post FRCS, I have to say.
And I think with the person specification, as is often the case, I think we're focusing on individual criteria here in terms of whether they are acceptable or not. It's really important that the applicants look at all the criteria in the context of one another to get a really good idea of that level of knowledge, skills, and experience required, and whether they think that they would be able to demonstrate that through the application process.
Okay. Are there any further questions? We give everybody another 30 seconds then. I think most people have asked what they wish to ask.
I can also illustrate here, Fiona, is that if any of the SAS surgeons where they work, if the workplace is affiliated with any of the medical schools, the medical schools give lots of opportunities to be involved in education, and that can be at different levels of being a module lead or a year lead in one of the years, or as an OSCE examiner, or an examiner as such, even for the writtens or the mock exam. So there are lots of opportunities by the university that can be used, because the reason being is it's important to get involved in education, because then you know how education system works, how to score candidates, what are the different criterias of assessing a candidate. If someone has done PG Cert in education or MSc in education, that is another bonus point in your application. So look at the opportunities within education. There are lots the universities can offer. And another thing is join ISCP, because ISCP also gives you lots of guidance on what recognizes you as an individual within surgical field with different titles you may hold, whether you are an examiner or you're an educational supervisor or clinical supervisor. So it's kind of using all the college resources, and you might find there are lots and lots of resources which we have not utilized. In addition, we have now professional passport, which trainees use, and now we have access to those professional passports as SAS surgeons as well. So it will be nice to look at those professional passports to see, do you have a gap in your application? So don't lose any opportunity to say, what do I need to do? Because these resources have lots of information and lots of advice. And if anyone wants more information, more advice, they can always contact either someone at the examination group, what Alex had kindly given the email address for, or they can contact the SAS forum, because then you can have one-to-one conversation with one of us where we can guide you and put in the right direction. So it is a question of just utilizing the resources given by the college. Don't just depend on what you know as a person that you need to do as an examiner. There's lots of help out there. So please do use it and make yourself visible in our college life.
Yes, indeed. Please feel free to join the SAS forum. It is a thriving community, and the more the merrier. Vanita has led it very well, and I think it's been a driving force. And in fact, that Vanita has been a driving force in pushing through this change to allow SAS examiners, SAS doctors, surgeons to become examiners for the intercollegiate MRCS examination. So all credit to Vanita for that. And that's because she sat on and chaired our SAS forum. So thank you, Vanita.
Thank you. And
I think probably we...
And just to add, we do have positions open for recruitment in the SAS forum. Adverts are out there. Do look at the SAS forum webpage. The applications are still coming, and we still welcome many applications. I think closing date is end of January. Do join us. Even the chair position is open, because I'm finishing my tenure very soon. So I'm hoping that we will have much more stronger membership with new vision, new inspiration, and new ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanita. So I'll just ask the panel if they have any last comments to make. Alex, do you have any last comments to make?
I think just to reiterate the point that we as the English College and I as the Director of Exams I'm really excited about this new development in the eligibility criteria for the MRCS for all the reasons you've said previously, Fiona. I think that this represents really positive progress for us as a college and for the exam as well. And in response to a lot of the quite specific queries regarding criteria, I would encourage people to engage with me or the department more generally. If you're not sure whether your knowledge, skills, experience are sufficient at this stage, reach out to us, and I'd be very happy to provide further guidance.
Thank you very much, Alex. Vanita, any last comments?
No, just thank you for being here, for listening to us, for asking us questions, because this is what we want. We want our members and fellows, or even those who are not members and fellows, to ask college what we can do for you or what we are doing for you. So please join the forum. Even if you decide not to join the forum, do communicate with us, send us emails, come and visit the college, meet us in person. And thank you for all your support, because without you, the college won't exist. So we do rely on you and we do depend on you. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you to Fiona and Alex for your very kind presence and explaining the processes. And many thanks to Jane, Antonio, and Phoebe for arranging this webinar, because behind the scenes, lots of work goes on. They don't always get seen. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you to the audience here as well.
Thank you. And I'd just like to reiterate what Vanita has said. To me, the college is not the building in Lincoln's Inn Fields. The college is all of the surgeons who are members and fellows, all of the people who are not quite members and fellows yet because they're still sitting out exams, and all the staff. And that is a huge entity. It is not just a building in Lincoln's Inn Fields. So thank you, everybody, for listening today. And I hope we've given you enough food for thought. And we look forward to your applications coming in. So thank you very much.